Thanks again for joining me here, and happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. You know, there is a Spanish proverb that says that an ounce of mother is worth a ton of priest. I don't know about all that, but I do know that moms have such a special role to play in all of our lives, and they have such a high calling and so much trust that God has offered to them with these children that moms have, and it is a special day and a special calling. I also know that Mother's Day may be a tough day for some of you. For some of you, maybe this is the first year that you're celebrating Mother's Day without your mom. You've lost your mom, or maybe your mom died a while ago, and that hurt is just still there. If you are childless or lost a child, you may feel a little bit like an outsider today. Or if you had a poor relationship with your mom, you might feel even a little bit guilty today. Or the flip side, in a sense, if you have rebellious kids or just kids you have a hard time connecting with, getting along with, there's just a lot of tension there. They've maybe rejected the things that you want for them. Maybe they have rejected the prayers that you have offered up on their behalf. And you might feel a little bit like a failure today, or you have even disappointed God. So I pray today that you would especially know God's peace, that God so much understands what you're feeling because he has experienced the gamut of responses to him as a parent. And I pray today that you would believe in God's healing as well as his power to reconcile. As we get going, let's watch this video that we have here about Mom's Day. This really is a different kind of Mother's Day this year, right? And I think that video captured that sentiment really well. And I really like the end of that video. You can choose what kind of mom you're going to be. You can choose the kind of attitude that you're going to have. And that's especially important when you are in circumstances that you really don't like very much, which is kind of what we are all in right now. And I think that goes for moms of kids who are 5, as well as moms of kids who are 55. For this Mother's Day, I want to look at a story from the Old Testament. And I chose this story more for the questions that the story itself generates than for the specific details of the story. The questions the story spawns, I think, translate very well for moms today. And you're going to see what I mean as we keep going here. The story comes from the Old Testament in a book called 2 Kings. And it involves the prophet Elisha, who obviously had to be one of the most handsome of prophets, because if you keep reading through the Bible, you'll see that Elisha was bald. Well, the events of the story go something like this. The prophet Elisha would regularly visit this town called Shunem. And Shunem seems to be centrally located amongst a lot of towns. And so maybe it was a good ministry hub for Elisha. And in Shunem, there was a couple who were residents there. And there was an elderly husband and with a younger wife. And they began hosting Elisha every time he would come to town there. And maybe because he was coming there so often, this young wife eventually compelled her husband to build a small room for him up on their roof, dedicated to Elisha when he would come to town there. So he would definitely have a place to stay, fully furnished. And it's just a wonderful gift that they were providing for Elisha. And they were very generous. And you think about that, we sometimes do that for guests when they come into town, even if they're people who are coming to church, we'll find a guest room for them. But how many of us have actually built a room onto our house for when that person would be coming in? So this is a pretty neat couple here. Well, her hospitality impressed Elisha so much that he wanted to do something for her. And so he asked his servant to call this lady when they were in town there. And he says, well, what can I do for you? I know some pretty important people. I travel around a lot. Do you want me to put in a good word for you with, some of the big wigs? She didn't really have any need for that. Well, soon thereafter, Elisha's servant tells Elisha that the woman is childless, and that reminds him that her husband is also old. And so she comes again, and as she stands in the doorway, Elisha tells her what she has, for who knows how long, longed to hear. And he says, in about a year, you will hold a son in your arms. And you can almost hear her emotion when she basically says, don't you get my hopes up. She's been wanting this for a while. Well, a year passes, and just as Elisha had said, a boy is born, and everyone lives happily ever after, right? Not at all. A few years later, out in the fields one day, uh, this young son begins to suffer, and we're not sure what it is that actually happened. It could be something like a heat stroke. It sounds like it maybe even could be an aneurysm of some sort, but we just don't know. What we do know is that he's calling out to his father about his head is just killing him. And the father tells the servant to take him to his mom. And the servant does that and places the boy in her lap. And in her lap is where he dies. And you can almost hear her words to Elisha, this sort of echo, I told you not to get my hopes up. Well, the woman carries her dead son's body up to that room that they had built for Elisha, and she lays him up on the bed there in the guest room. And then she rides out to find the man of God. Well, sitting in another town, Elisha, the man of God, happens to be looking out into the distance, and he sees this woman approaching with her servant. And he didn't know what had happened, but he guessed that something was not quite right. And so he hurriedly sends his servant out to them, and he sends them with 3 questions. And the questions are these: is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? Now, we're not going to use those questions in the same way, but on this Mother's Day, I would suggest to you that these three questions are still super important. All of you moms are right now probably on your couch or on your recliner or sitting at your dining table watching this. You are not on a donkey heading out to see Elisha the prophet. But were he to show up at your house today, he still might ask you, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? And I think those would be very pertinent and significant questions. So moms, is it well with you? With all of your responsibilities and hobbies and stuff to do, is it well with you? How is your heart? Where are you with Jesus? Is it well with you? And that's so important because how it is with you spills over into how it's going to be with your kids and with your home. William Ross Wallace said that the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. And so if the women of the land lose connection with God, if they forget how they're supposed to live like Jesus lived, there will be a ripple effect. And so the question stands, is it well with you? Who a mother is influences who her children are. What moms value, that will have an effect. What moms say and how they say what they say will have an effect. What moms pursue with their time and with their money and with their energy, it builds a legacy in their kids. And I don't say that to make anybody feel guilty. I know none of us are perfect. And I absolutely believe that our kids eventually make their own choices and take their own paths. What primarily governs the steps of any person's life is themselves. But moms, I do want you to remember that you do have a position of leverage with your kids. You cannot not make an impact. You have the ability to try and instill compassion, patience, a love for Jesus, so many good things. So it is really important for it to be well with you. This woman in 2 Kings seems to be a very hospitable woman. She seems to be a nurturer. You can see it in the way she treated Elisha, and she seems to be committed to her husband and he to her. It seems that she goes to the man of God, Elisha, because he's a man of God, and she values that. She was drawn to him when she's drawn to him even before she had a child. And I would like to think that her child saw that as he was growing up, even in his young years. I bet her son knew the story of his promised birth. He knew what that room on the roof was put there for. He saw that his mom served the man of God and that she herself was a woman of God. The first rule of being a good mom, you love the Lord with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. You make sure things are well with you. Is it well with your husband? Now, not all moms have husbands, right? And so this isn't a backhanded smack on the moms out there who might be single moms. But to the moms who do have husbands, is it well with your husband? And there's a couple of ways that I want us to think about this. Is he, your husband, is he doing well in his relationship with God? You wives and moms absolutely cannot control that, but you can encourage him and pray for him. You can think of ways that could help him spend more time cultivating his relationship with God and with you and with the kids. Are there things that you could do that would help that to flourish, that would free him up for those activities? Is it well with your husband? Is he doing well? And then secondly, is it well with your husband in terms of you and him, your horizontal relationship? We mentioned ripple effects. And listen, if things are not well between mom and dad, there is a ripple effect, right? So moms, inasmuch as it's within your power to do so, are you creating an atmosphere of peace and honor and respect and encouragement? Are you helping make it well with him? Is it well with your husband? And is it well with your child? Now, I know that kids can miss a lot of what you do, but they can see some of how you've invested yourself in them, some of how you have sacrificed yourself for them. And mom, you can have such an influence on who your kids are. So how are you doing with them? How are you doing loving them? How are you doing working on their behalf? How's your quality time with them? And maybe a big one to think about, do your kids trust that you have their best interests in mind? Kids are very sensitive, I think, these days, especially to how their parents see themselves through the kids. It's much easier to post something on Facebook because I know all my friends will see this, that you can be proud of in a child. They did something great, and so that reflects on me. And I get that. But kids, all of us, but kids especially, and your kids, moms, do they trust that you have their best interest in mind? I love the story about former President Jimmy Carter. He told about an incident that occurred after he left the White House. And a reporter came to Plains, Georgia to interview his mother. And it was in relation to an article about President Carter and his family. And his mom really didn't want to do the interview, but she was being gracious and agreed to do so. And so when the reporter showed up, knocked at her door, Mrs. Carter invited her in. And the reporter began to ask some pretty hard questions. And she was actually kind of aggressive and getting a little rude. And she said, I want to ask you a question. Your son ran for the presidency on the premise that he would always tell the truth. Has he ever lied? And the president's mom said, I think he's truthful. I think you can depend on his word. And then the reporter again asked, has he ever lied in his entire life? And his mom said, well, I guess maybe he's told a little white lie. And the reporter responded, aha, see, he has lied. If he told a white lie, he's lied. But she wasn't satisfied, and she pursued more questioning. She says, a white lie sounds just like a lie to me. So how do you define a white lie? And Lillian Carter said, it's like a moment ago when you knocked on the door and I went and I said that I was glad to see you. Mom still had his back, still wanting to protect her kid, still had his best interest in her heart. And that protection changes over the years. And moms, you have to let your kids grow up and let them fail and let them hurt. and your role changes a bit as you grow up. But some things don't change. They want to know and need to know that you love them, will support them, will fight for them, that you're going to have their back. The Shunammite mom in 2 Kings is fighting for her son. Even after he's died, she rode out to see the man of God. She knew that that was the one place that she needed to go. Well, let me tell you the rest of the story. After the servant is sent to her as she is riding into the town where Elisha is and has posed those questions to him, to her, she makes her way into town and she falls at Elisha's feet. And the servant is a little bit alarmed by that. I guess she's broken sort of social protocol there and wants to move her away from Elisha, but Elisha tells the servant to leave her alone. She's obviously in great distress. And she looks up at him and tells him, basically, "Didn't I tell you?" And Elisha didn't know that the boy had died. And when he finds out, he immediately sends his servant. He gives him his staff and sends his servant to run ahead of them and go put the staff on the boy who was lying on the bed in the guest room. And the woman tells Elisha, basically, "I'm not leaving here until you get up and come with me. I'm not leaving." And so they began to journey back to Shunem. And on their way back, Elisha's servant runs back to him and says, "Nothing's happening. I did what you said." And finally, Elisha and the mother get there to the home. And Elisha goes in, closes the door, and he lays himself down, mouth to mouth, eye to eye, stretches himself out over the boy. And he begins to warm up. And Elisha gets up and begins to walk and pray. And he does that again. And the boy begins to sneeze, and he gets up. And he goes and gets the mom, and he says, "Take your son." You moms today can breathe some life into your kids. And you have a unique way of doing that. But you can also go to men of God, and hopefully your husband is one of those. But regardless, the writer of Hebrews tells you that you can go straight to Jesus. You can go to God yourself on behalf of your kids in hopes that they would come face to face, eye to eye, mouth to mouth with him, and that life would be breathed into them. I always remember a story that Rick Atchley, who's a minister at a very large church in Fort Worth, Texas, tells about when he was growing up. He was at a fairly small church growing up. They didn't have a very large Sunday school program. And so what they would do is they would combine the kids' classes together, like most churches actually in the world. And so what happened was all of these kids were combined together and made for a total of 10 kids in the classroom there. 9 of them were girls. 1 of them was Rick. Now, that's not good news for a third grade boy. That's not an enjoyable experience for him. And he began to hate to go to church because he just didn't want to be the only boy in class. He began to pretend to be sick to see if he could get out of going. But his mom knew that church was a good place for her son to be, and there were good people for him to be around. Well, it turns out that there was a man at this small church, and they all called him Brother Homer Ware. And all the kids knew him because apparently he was a very large man and kind of big, burly, country type kind of guy. And The kids knew him because of his size, but also he remembered all their names. Well, one day, Brother Ware figured out what was going on in the Sunday school class, and he came up with a plan thinking about Rick's dilemma there. He began to go to Rick's Sunday school class. And so every Sunday, Big Brother Ware would go down into that little room where the kids had gathered and try to squeeze himself into those little kid desks. And he would always sit by Rick. He made sure that Rick wouldn't be the only boy in class there. And every Sunday, he would always tell him, he said, I am so proud that you go to this church, Rick. And I'm praying that one day you will grow up to be not just a man of God, but a preacher. And this very morning, Rick preaches at a church where he is touching literally thousands of people. Why? Well, in part because there was one older man of God who made it a point to breathe some life into a young person. Moms, there are men at church who will do that for your kids. Rick's mom, like the Shunammite mom, wanted it to be well with her child. She was a godly mom and wanted her child to be in the presence of godly men and in the presence of God himself in hopes that life could be breathed into him. Moms, you have an incredible calling. I hope you feel honored that you've been called to this role. And I hope that you will keep thinking about, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? And is it well with your child? So we're going to have a song, and then we're going to have a time to commune together here in the Lord's Supper. God bless you.